All right, guys, so thus far, as I said, we've covered the cosmological argument, which uses the beginning of the universe. It uses 5 scientific principles to show that the universe had a beginning and therefore a beginner. We then talked about the design argument, which we focused on the human body. And so there's aspects of true design in the human body, and therefore it's easy to see for a rational person, a person seeking truth and evidence, that the human body was designed by God. Now listen, now we're going to switch gears, and we're going to leave the realm of science, and we're really just going to use the realm of, well, I guess we could say logic. I guess we could just kind of say thinking about ideas clearly. So I am going to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. This next argument, the conceptual argument, it is also one of my favorites. They're all my favorites at one time or another. But the conceptual argument is a little bit abstract. And so you may really like it. You may not really like it. It may be very easy for you to understand, or it may be a stretch. But whatever the case would be, it may be a very good argument, a very good line of thinking for some of the people that you talk to, because some of the folks, your children, your college students, or your coworkers, they may not be very scientifically minded people either. And this might be, perhaps, the greatest argument for them. If you know anybody that likes math, anybody that likes geometry, or anybody that likes logic, I'm just here to tell you, this may be the argument that you would want to maybe start with to build a bridge of understanding, the conceptual argument. So I'll try to be brief with this one, and then we're probably going to move into the fourth and last argument, the moral argument for God's existence, before lunch. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. This one is, we're going to do the conceptual argument a little bit differently. Rather than read through the entire argument and all of its premises, we're going to take them one at a time and then come to the conclusion. All right, premise number 1 is very simple. Premise number 1 of the conceptual argument says this: there are concepts, ideas, and laws that are eternal, necessary, and unchanging. So I don't know if you've ever considered this before. Most people, I think, have not. But the conceptual argument, it does focus on ideas. It focuses on concepts, or you could say on laws. And really, what we're trying to discover here is we're trying to focus your mind to understand that there are some ideas in our universe, some ideas in reality, and these ideas, listen, these concepts are eternal. In other words, they've been here forever. They are necessary, which means it is impossible for these ideas to not exist or not be true, and they are unchanging. They can never change. They can never mutate. So here are some examples of some concepts, ideas, and laws that are eternal, they are necessary, and unchanging. Numbers are an example of this. Now, I'm not talking about integers. Integers or numerals are what you put on a paper, right? For example, if you wanted to express the number 3, how many ways could you do that? Well, I could draw 3 little dots on a paper. I could draw the number 3 that most of you are familiar with, but I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the numeral or the integer 3. I'm talking about the idea. Give me your full attention now. I'm focusing on the idea of the number 3, or the idea of the number 8, or 777, whatever number you want to think of, or just even the number 1. Numbers are eternal concepts. Have you ever thought about that? Now, an atheist or a person who doesn't agree with this type of thinking, they're going to tell you this. They're going to say, no, numbers were invented by humans. Numbers were invented by humans. And you're going to respond, no, that's not true. Humans couldn't have invented numbers. They'll say, yes, they did. For example, the first 7 humans, they invented, not discovered, they invented the number 7 on this calendar date. That's when they invented the number 7. And then you would simply ask the question, okay, well, the day before that, how many humans were there? There were 7 humans. They invented the number 7 on this day. And you say, but what about on the day before that? How many humans were there then? You see, if the number 7 didn't exist, how many humans were there? I told you it was a little bit abstract. Anyway, numbers are an eternal concept. The number 1 is an idea that has always been, and it must always be. It's unchanging. Or mathematical equations. You can think of any mathematical equation you want. It could be something very simple like 1 + 1 = 2, 3 × 3 = 9, or it could be a complex mathematical operation. But mathematical equations, if you talk to a philosopher of mathematics or really just any clear abstract thinker, they'll tell you that these mathematical equations are ideas, they're concepts that are eternal. 1 + 1 = 2, listen, that has always been reality. It is necessary. In other words, there is no universe, there is no reality where 1 + 1 could equal anything except 2. And anyone that tells you different than that is a fool. So it's nonsense. It is a necessary truth. It is impossible for it to not be true, and it's also unchanging. It could never be anything different. No matter what universe you would ever live in, no matter what reality there would ever be, listen, 1 + 1 = 2 is an eternal truth. Or how about this? Geometric shapes. The geometric shape of a cube or of a sphere or of a triangle, whether it's a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional geometric shape. Do you realize this? A geometric shape is an idea. It is a concept. Can I tell you something that's going to kind of freak you out? Listen. Raise your hand this morning for participation. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a circle, drawn or whatever. Raise your hand. All of you are misinformed. Did you know that none of you have ever seen a true circle? And I really mean that. None of you have ever seen a true circle according to the rules of geometry. And here's why. Because according to the rules of geometry, the border of a circle, the outline of a circle, that line can have no width, according to the laws of geometry. Because if the line, the perimeter of that, the circumference of that circle, if that line has any width, now you have a big problem. Because there's an infinite number of points within the width of that line. And now you cannot accurately calculate the radius or the diameter or the circumference. So according to the rules of geometry, and if you don't believe me, Google it later, the outer line of a circle technically can have no width. But if it didn't have width, could you see it? No. So in order that you can see the line, when it's drawn, it has width. But you know what that means? You've never really seen a true circle. You never have. But this is interesting, isn't it? Though you've never actually seen a true circle, you have that concept in your mind. You've never actually seen a triangle. You've never actually seen a true sphere, a true cube. But yet you have the concept of these geometric shapes. Somehow they're communicated to your mind, and you represent them imperfectly, but yet you have an understanding of them, just like numbers. You could represent the number 3 in 100 different ways, but you perceive the idea of 3. You perceive the idea of 1 + 1 = 2. Do you understand now? So there is something about these concepts, these truths. It's beyond this world. These are concepts, these are ideas. As I said, they are eternal, they are necessary, and they are unchanging. And listen, all you have to do is find one. That's all you need for this argument, is find one number, one geometric shape, or one concept that fits the definition. Or finally, maybe something that would be better for you to understand are the laws of logic. The laws of logic are wonderful, they're beautiful. As a Christian, we confidently can say they are an expression of the mind of God. One of the names of Jesus, right? John 1:1, in the beginning was the Logos, which is the reasoning principle. So logic flows from the mind of God. The universe is constructed. The fabric of reality, logic is woven into it. Love flows from God, goodness flows from God, but logic flows from God. And so the laws of logic, they're metaphysical principles. They're not physical, they're metaphysical. They're beyond the physical, but they do govern reality. And so therefore, the laws of logic are a great example of premise 1, a concept, an idea, or a law that is eternal, necessary, and unchanging. And let me just encourage you, all you have to do is find one. Just pick one. So maybe you don't even know what the laws of logic are, okay? Here's one. Something exists. That's called the law of existence. That's really complicated, right? Something exists. A exists. Here's another one. The law of identity. I am me. Just think about that for a while. The law of identity. In other words, A is not B and B is not A. It's because of the law of identity and the law of the excluded middle that you don't walk into the wall, you go through the door. Because you know that you are not compatible with walking into that wall. I know that sounds weird, but these are hardwired into your brain. And so you know that you are, and you know that you are not the door, so you have to make a choice. You have to either walk into the door or walk through the door, and so you choose to walk through it. Let me use another one. This one is very, very popular. It's called the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction, just so you know, is a great tool. One philosopher said that the law of non-contradiction is like a battle axe. And you can take the law of non-contradiction and you can use it against every religion in the world and every false philosophy, and you'll chop all the trees in the forest down. And the only one that's left standing is Christianity. So the law of non-contradiction is very, very simple. You cannot have A and negative A at the same time or in the same way. At the same time or in the same place, you cannot have A and negative A. So it goes like this. Do you exist right now? I know that's a pretty hard question to ask, right? But on a Saturday morning, do you exist right now? Yes. Do you not exist right now? No. Is it even possible for you to exist and not exist at the same time and in the same way? No, it's either one or the other. And that is your understanding of the law of non-contradiction. You've never even heard of the law of non-contradiction, perhaps. But guess what? It was downloaded into your mind when you were young, when you were born, when you were created. So the law of non-contradiction is true. It's a part of reality. Now that principle that A cannot be A and negative A at the same time and same place, how long has that been a part of reality? It's eternal. That principle, that concept can never change. That principle is necessary. It must always be true. So do you understand what I'm saying? That all you have to do is find one example of premise one, and there are many to choose from. There are certain concepts, there are certain ideas, certain laws that are eternal, necessary, and unchanging. And you can take your pick from numbers, mathematical equations, geometric shapes, or the laws of logic. We know that much to be true. So let's move on to premise two. Now these concepts, whichever ones that you want to choose, these concepts or ideas, there's only three possibilities where they come from. They must originate from human minds. They must be Platonic objects, and I'll tell you what that is in a second, or they must come from an eternal mind. From an eternal mind. Those are the only three possibilities. Those ideas, whether you want to talk about geometric shapes, whether you want to talk about laws of logic or numbers or mathematical equations, there are only three possibilities. Those concepts were either invented by humans, those concepts exist as real eternal objects floating around somewhere like Plato thought, or they come from an eternal mind. So let's move on to premise 3 here. These concepts, those ideas we're talking about, they do not come from human minds, and they are not Platonic objects. Now let's think about this for a second. We can say that those ideas, whether you're talking about the concept of a sphere or the law of non-contradiction, those concepts, they don't come from human minds. Why? Because they are beyond human minds, and they predate them. In other words, if somebody wants to tell you that human beings invented the law of non-contradiction, you simply ask them, okay, when did they invent it? They'll give you a date or something. And then you ask them, but what was reality like the day before? Could A be A and negative A at the same time? Could that human who invented the law the next day, the day before, could he exist and not exist at the same time and same way the day prior? The obvious answer is what? No. Neither could his father neither could his father's father, neither could the first human, because the law of non-contradiction has always been, and it must always be. It is a law that governs reality. A sphere has always been an eternal, unchanging concept. Nobody invented that. It was discovered. 1 + 1 = 2. All of these are discovered concepts. So they don't come from human minds because they predate them. These ideas are eternal, they must exist, and they are unchanging. Now let's go to the second option. Maybe they're Platonic objects. Now you probably are thinking, what in the world is a Platonic object? Well, Plato's a very interesting guy, one of the greatest thinkers in Western civilization. Somebody well said that the history of Western philosophy are merely footnotes to Plato. So, and just so you know, Plato was a theist. He believed in a creator. He believed in a God. And he and Aristotle, they defeated atheism in their day. So Plato is a very, very interesting man. Not a perfect man, some strange things about him. But Plato's philosophy is typically called the theory of the forms. Maybe you saw a movie years ago that said, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Did you ever see that? You ever hear that? Okay, never mind. The same movie, the character, he said that this world is simply shadows and dust. And what he was making reference to is Plato. Because Plato believed that everything in this world was kind of a lesser temporary reflection or manifestation, but there was a different world. He didn't have the word dimension, he didn't have the word universe, but there was a different realm, and he called it the realm of the forms. And he says in his books, which are pretty interesting to read in his dialogues, that in this world of the forms, there was a pure number one. Actually, something like the number one floating there. And you may find this laughable, but I'm just telling you, there are Christian Platonists. And this has been a philosophy that has impacted the world stronger than you realize. And every manifestation of the number one in our physical world is this perfect form of the number one manifesting itself in different ways. In this world, there is the form of a horse. In this world, there is the form of a sphere, and so on and so forth. Now, the most important question to ask then is, okay, Mr. Plato, in your world of the forms, how many are there? And you know what the answer is? Infinite. If you can imagine this world, it would be cluttered beyond imagination. I think you have a picture of some numbers, and it would look something like this. The theory of the forms, it would be cluttered with an eternal realm of objects that have been there forever. Now listen, as interesting as that might be to talk about, and as much as I like Plato as a historical thinker, let me just ask you, does that make any real sense? No. Do we have any reason for believing that that is the case? No. Do we have any way of really understanding, if that were the case, how oneness, the theory, the form of one, could be communicated and manifested in this world? No. In other words, it's not a good idea. There's no evidence for it, and there's no reason to believe whatsoever that the concepts and the ideas that are eternal are actually Platonic objects. That's all that means. So what that means for us, listen, is the first two options have been eliminated. There were only three choices. These eternal concepts, whether they're spheres, numbers, mathematical equations, we can go back to premise 3 now. They do not originate from human minds, and they are not Platonic objects. So we've eliminated the first two possibilities. There remains only one more possibility. The only other possible option is premise 4. Therefore, these eternal, necessary, and unchanging concepts must come from an eternal, necessary, unchanging mind. Listen, let me just explain it to you again. There is a simplicity and a beauty and an elegance to this argument. Ideas come from minds. There exist in our world certain ideas, certain concepts that are eternal and necessary and unchanging. But if ideas come from minds, and if you can find just one idea, one concept that is truly eternal, unnecessary, and unchanging, it must come from an eternal mind, a necessary mind, and an unchanging mind. Do you understand? That's how powerful it is. It's that simple. Because they cannot come from human minds. They are not Platonic objects. The only other option available is they must come from a mind that is also eternal, necessary, and unchanging. And what that means is if you can just find, even if it's just one, if you can find one concept, one equation, one law of logic, it points to a mind that is eternal, a mind that is necessary, and a mind that is unchanging. This mind is the source, listen to this, is the source of the near infinite amount of concepts, ideas, laws, equations, and numbers that exist. That tells us something else. That mind would have to be omniscient. It would have to be an omniscient, infinite mind because there are an infinite number of these concepts. So this argument leads you to the discovery of a mind that is eternal, necessary, unchanging, and omniscient. And we know who that is. This eternal, necessary, and unchanging mind is God. Do you understand? Thoroughly confused? Clear as mud? Okay. St. Augustine, maybe some of you know St. Augustine from the 4th century, he loved Plato, and he loved his idea of the forms. But Augustine simply made one change. He said, "My dear Plato, you are thoroughly confused. These concepts and ideas do not exist eternally in and of themselves. They exist in the mind of God." And that's why I love the conceptual argument, because even if you don't know science or history or anything like that, all you have to do is talk about one eternal idea with someone, bring them to the understanding that the source of an eternal idea must be an eternal mind, and that mind is God. Very simple. All right, let's just move right into our next argument then. This is called the moral argument. The moral argument for God's existence. Now, again, some of you may be familiar with this one, maybe some of you are not, but I do want to just let you know this is, for some people, the most powerful argument. Why? Because what we're going to be talking about here is good and evil. We're going to be talking about things that are right and wrong, good or bad, good and evil. Now, there are people that you speak with, maybe your children, maybe your college students, maybe your coworkers, maybe that fire-breathing atheist professor that you know. They're not going to be sensitive to science, so you can't use the cosmological or design argument effectively. They're not going to be that abstract in their thinking, and so the conceptual argument might go over their head. But listen, they're in touch with morality. This is a powerful argument. Some people say one of the most effective, because every single human being on planet Earth, regardless of your intellectual status, regardless of your income, regardless of your culture, listen, every single human being is in touch with good and with evil. And listen, the benefit of this argument is, how many times have you heard an atheist say, "Why is there so much evil in the world?" How many times have you heard people say that? A lot. And if they really mean what they say, for evil to exist in the world, which it does, there must be a God. So let's watch a video to introduce you to this argument.
Can you be good without God? Let's find out. Absolutely astounding. There you have it. Undeniable proof that you can be good without believing in God. But wait, the question isn't, can you be good without believing in God? The question is, can you be good without God? See, here's the problem. If there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong? If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. And here's why. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down. God's nature provides an objective reference point for moral values. It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. But if there's no God, there's no objective reference point. All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than anyone else's viewpoint. This kind of morality is subjective, not objective. It's like a preference for strawberry ice cream. The preference is in the subject, not the object. So it doesn't apply to other people. In the same way, subjective morality applies only to the subject. It's not valid or binding for anyone else. So, in a world without God, there can be no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. God has expressed his moral nature to us as commands. These provide the basis for moral duties. For example, God's essential attribute of love is expressed in his command to love your neighbor as yourself. This command provides a foundation upon which we can affirm the objective goodness of generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality. And we can condemn as objectively evil greed, abuse, and discrimination. This raises a problem. Is something good just because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good? The answer is neither one. Rather, God wills something because he is good. God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is. Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is. But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard. So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us? No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature, highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat. If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong. But the problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist. Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real, our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real. Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals. We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong for everybody, always. Is this just a personal preference or opinion? No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the moral reality every one of us experiences every day. In fact, the existence of objective morality points us directly to the existence of God.
So this is, as we said, this is the moral argument. And I've rephrased it a little bit from what was up there, but it's essentially the same. And as I said, this has to do with good and evil, right and wrong. And since the problem of evil, since the problem of pain, suffering, and evil is probably the best argument that atheists has. It's not a good argument, but it's just the best one that they have. And it's probably one of the most common objections that you're going to come up against as a Christian. The moral argument is connected to that. And if you understand it, you can learn how to use the moral argument to flip that question on its head and say, wait a second, if you believe in evil, if you think that evil is real, there must be a God. The very asking of the question of evil in this world points to God. Let's read through the premises together. First of all, we can see if there is no God, then evil and good are not real. Now, that's what I mean by OMV, objective moral values. Objective moral values, this is very important. When I say objective, listen, this is important. What I mean is this: it's right or it's wrong, whether you know that or not, or whether you believe that or not. When I say it's objectively right or objectively wrong, I'm not saying that everyone agrees with that. What I am saying is that there are certain things that are objectively right always or objectively wrong always, whether you agree with it or not. It is still wrong. If Adolf Hitler would have conquered the world and he would have tried to brainwash, or let's say he did brainwash everyone into thinking it was morally acceptable to put Jewish people in ovens and kill them and burn their bodies, even if Adolf Hitler would have convinced the world, his world empire, and brainwashed them, would it have been right just because he said it was right? No, because there are certain things that are objectively wrong. They're always wrong or they're always right, regardless of if you believe that or not, or even if you know that or not. That's what I mean when we talk about objective moral values. So again, premise 1, if there is no God, then evil and good are not real. Premise 2, however, evil and good are real. Premise number 2 really is the key premise in this argument. What you really have to get someone to understand, get someone to agree with, is simply this question. Do you believe that there is at least one thing in this world, not 10 things, not 5 things, do you believe there is just one thing in this world that is really evil? And what do you think the answer is going to be? Yes. Or you can flip it and say, do you believe there is at least one thing in this world that is objectively always good? Whether people believe in it or not, or they know it or not, that one thing is always good. And if they answer yes, then it leads us unmistakably to the conclusion, therefore, God exists. And He is the source of objective moral value. Good and right flow from His character. So let's go through these one at a time, and then we're going to break for lunch. Let's go up to premise 1 again, and we're going to demonstrate, we're going to investigate premise 1, and let's see if it's true. So again, premise number 1, if there is no God, then evil and good, or we could say objective moral values, are not real. Now listen, something that is very important, like it said in the video, which is from Dr. William Lane Craig. I highly recommend his website to you, reasonablefaith.org. He is one of the greatest defenders of the Christian faith in the world today. I think one of the greatest Christian minds ever. And his website, reasonablefaith.org, excellent resource for really, really good resources. So as you saw in that video, we are not saying in premise number 1 that atheists can't do good things. They're going to misunderstand the question. Atheists do this all the time. They don't listen, and they don't pay attention to these arguments. So remember with the cosmological argument on Friday night, remember how we said premise 1 is misunderstood? Everything that begins to exist must have a cause. And remember how we said the atheist will go, ha-ha, what about God? And you're going to say as a Christian, what? Please read it again. It said everything that begins to exist. Does that apply to God? No, Mr. Atheist, please pay attention. Okay, so in the same way, they misunderstand premise 1 of the moral argument. We are not saying that atheists can't be good, that they can't have good behavior. We are not saying that atheists are incapable of good actions. Let me just tell you this. I know a lot of atheists that are great, nice, moral people. Matter of fact, let's be honest, okay? There are many times where certain unbelievers, certain atheists or humanists, they put Christians to shame. Sometimes we as Christians, we know better and we ought to live better, but we don't. So we are not saying that just because you don't believe that God exists, you're incapable of good behavior. Absolutely not. Of course you're capable of good behavior. Of course you are capable of benevolent actions and nice, kind gestures. Listen, this is not a question of moral behavior. Listen, it is a question of good or bad exist. Do you see the difference? It's not a question of whether you as an atheist can act good or bad. No. The question is, if God doesn't exist, then there exists no such thing as quote-unquote good or quote-unquote bad. Do you see the difference? So it is not a question of existence, it is a question I'm sorry, it is a question of existence, not behavior. We're talking about good and bad existing, not whether the atheist can have some good behavior. So, it's not to say that atheists can't do good. And furthermore, listen, the theist, that's you, the person that believes in God, we agree with premise 1. Let's read premise 1 again. If there is no God, then evil and good, objective moral values, are not real. We, as God believers, as a theist, we agree with this because we believe, we know that only God is the objective and universal standard which can anchor moral values. Do you understand? Have you ever had a compass in your hand? You ever had a real compass? Not like on your iPhone. I mean a real compass, a lensatic compass. You know, the needle that floats on liquid? So your compass points north. Why does it point north? A compass points north because of magnetic north pole. Now, magnetic north is not true north, but that's besides the point, okay? I don't want to confuse you. Magnetic north, there's a magnetic field around the earth. It draws the needle of your compass to point towards it, okay? God, in terms of morality, He is the magnetic north pole. And His influence, He is the one that shows us what is good and what is bad. And that's why we, as theists, we agree with premise 1. Yes, if there's no God, there is no such thing as evil, and there is no such thing as good. Why? Because we believe that God is the magnetic north pole of morality, and our moral compass points north to God. When we go away from God, when we go away from magnetic north, well, of course, that's bad. But when we go true magnetic north towards God, when we are in line with His character, He Himself is the standard, we agree with premise 1. Hey, listen, but even the atheist agrees with premise 1, right? Let's read it again. If there is no God, then evil and good are not real. Does the atheist agree with that? Yes. They say, that's right. There is no God, and therefore, there is no real good. And there is no real bad. That's just your interpretation of it. Have you heard an atheist say that? That's why they'll say, I have my truth, you have your truth. There is no objective standard. There is no true magnetic north for morality, the atheist will say. So they agree with premise 1. Do you understand this so far? This is a good argument because they will agree with premise 1. They believe in relativism. Now, usually what the atheist will do, he will say, listen, good and bad, that comes from society. That comes from culture. That comes from the upbringing of your parents or the national conditions in which you were raised. But that's an insufficient ground to anchor moral values. Because what about when one culture believes one way and one culture believes another way? There's going to be a conflict there. They'll say that it's good to love your neighbor, and this culture says it's good to eat your neighbor. And they have a conflict with each other. So we need something that is higher than that. Society is not sufficient. Upbringing is not sufficient. If there is no God, then evil and good are not real. Objective moral values don't really exist. Everything is subjective. A culture can disagree with another culture. So even though the atheist would try to say that moral values, good and bad, are anchored in society or anchored in your conditioning, you can say, but that still makes it relative. That still makes it subjective. Now let's go to premise 2. And this really, I think, is the hook here. Premise 2, however, evil and good are real. Evil and good are real. There are things in this world that even the atheist or the relativist find that are purely evil. We have some pictures here. Now these are difficult pictures to look at, but even the atheist or the relativist, they will think of war and the atrocities that have been committed through all the armed conflicts of mankind. They'll think of concentration camps and people that have been brutally mistreated in military conflicts. And they will say that is really evil. It's really bad. You think of Adolf Hitler. And we can understand that him killing 6 million Jews, his concentration camps, his ethnic policies of extermination against the Jews, against handicapped people, are really evil. You would be hard-pressed to find an atheist that would disagree with Adolf Hitler's policies being evil. Children, child abuse, child slavery, all kinds of things, very evil, very frustrating in this world. And I think we have one more. Just all kinds of conflict. So listen, all we're trying to say is that even to the atheist, even to the relativist, there are things that they will agree, at least just one thing, things that are purely and truly evil. And again, they are going to agree with this, because this is one of the prime arguments that they have against Christianity, that there is evil in the world. And so this is something good that you can take a hold of. This is something good that we can use. Likewise, you can flip it on its head and you can say, well, there are some things in this world that are objectively good. When a father and mother love their child, and when they treat their child with respect, when they take care of them, when they protect them, when they provide them, is that objectively good? Yes. Even the atheist will go home at night. The atheist will go home and he will do things that he considers, quote unquote, good. Why? Because he believes that good is real. He likewise believes that there are things in this world that are evil. Here's an approach. What you could do is you could try to find one example, at least one thing, that would shock someone into thinking that all humans would know is truly evil. For example, imagine this. As disgusting and as distasteful as this is, here's an example you can use. You can ask someone, do you think it is always evil, it is always wrong for someone to torture, rape, and eat little children? You can ask your atheist friend about that. And they'll probably cringe when they hear that. And that's all we're saying. Like torturing, raping, and eating little children all in succession, that is evil. I don't care who you are. I don't care what religion you subscribe to. I don't care what stage of history. I don't care whether the entire world believes contrary. That is something that is objectively always wrong. It is always evil. And the unbeliever, the atheist, there are extreme examples. You may have to push a little bit, but there are extreme examples of evil that they will agree with. And then all you have to do is simply say this, okay, stop. I agree with you. I believe that there is at least one thing, probably many, many things, that are truly evil. Evil is real. Good is likewise real. Objective moral values like good and bad, good and evil, they are real. But then you help your atheist friend understand, but listen, we can't even use those words unless we have a line to judge by. Unless we have a moral standard to make something good or a line to make something evil, then those moral values don't even exist. Do you follow me? There has to be a point of reference. Like you saw in the video, the man floating in space. When you float in space, maybe you've seen movies like this can at times cause extreme frustration, even danger for pilots or for astronauts. Because if there is no visual point of reference, you could be flying upside down, not know it, pull up, and crash your plane. Because you need a point of reference. Out in space, it's even worse. You have to have some kind of point of reference in the blackness of space. You don't know whether you're going forward or backward, up or down, left or right. You have to have a point of reference in the physical world. Likewise, listen, you have to have a point of reference in the moral world. Now, there are many atheists that even agree with this. Michael Ruse, the man that you saw quoted, he is an agnostic biologist. He said, the person who says it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Do you see what he did? He compared moral truth with mathematical truth. In other words, you really know that some things are wrong, he is saying. But the only reason that is true, Mr. Roos, Mr. Atheist, is because there is a magnetic moral north in this world. There is a moral law that presses down upon mankind. And we sense it. We know it. That is why the Hindu and the Buddhist and the Muslim and the Christian and the whoever, there are certain things that are objectively, morally wrong. Evil is real to us and good is real to us. Why? Well, we know there is a moral law because there is a real moral law giver. Our moral compass points in the same direction on these issues because there is a true magnetic north in terms of morality, and this is God himself. So let's read through the argument one more time, and then we'll bring it to a close. Premise number one, if there is no God, then evil and good are not real. Premise two, however, evil and good are real, and we are painfully aware of this fact. But that brings us to the incredible conclusion, therefore, God exists. And he is the source of objective moral values. You can basically tell your atheist friend, listen, if you say the word evil, if you believe evil is real, you have to believe in God. You have to believe that there is a moral standard, a moral line in which to anchor moral values. And this is God. When a person acts in accordance with God's character, that is good. When a person does something like God would do it, that is good. Listen, parents, let me give you a tip in parenting. When your children ask you, Mom and Dad, why is it wrong to steal? Most parents will say something like this: it is wrong to steal because God says, don't steal. Now, is that true? Yes, it's true. But it's actually deeper than that. That's superficially true. But it's not just true because God says it's true. What if God said to rape someone is good? Would that make it good? No. So it's not just because God says it. The deeper answer, the real answer is this, is because God would never steal. God's nature is not a nature of a person that would steal. And because God, in his character, is not a thief, we cannot be thieves. And because God in his character, in his nature, he would never steal, therefore he has commanded us to never steal, and therefore we don't steal. Junior, do you understand? God himself is the anchor for moral values. We don't just do certain things because the Bible says so. The deeper thing is God himself. He is the nature of good. He is the nature of good and right. And therefore he makes commands, and therefore we obey. And when we go against God's nature, that is evil, that is wrong, and that is unacceptable. Do you understand, ladies and gentlemen? So very simply, listen. If good and evil really exist, then God exists because he himself, his character, his essence, his nature, he is the standard and the source of objective moral values. And that is the moral argument. So there you have, ladies and gentlemen, 4 good arguments to answer that most fundamental question of humanity. Does God exist? Many questions are important, but the most important question is that. Does God exist? Everything in your life will be influenced based upon how you answer that question. And now you know, listen, now you know as a Christian, you here in this room, anybody listening to this teaching, you know more now than 95% of most Christians. Because you can point to at least 4 things in the natural world completely apart from the Bible. You can point to 4 things and you can bring someone to an understanding that God is real. You know what happens with a police detective, a police investigator? They will walk into a room, and you know what they'll do? They'll examine the crime scene, and they will look for evidence. They will look for things in the room. They'll look for the murder weapon or different objects, and what will they do? From the known facts in the room, they will combine that, and they will draw a conclusion. And guess what? That's what you can do now. You can help your friends understand, and your kids. You can say, listen, let's look into the world like a crime scene, and we can look at the beginning of the universe. We can look at design biologically in the human body. We can look at intellectual concepts, ideas, and we can look at morality. And in the crime scene of the universe, in the crime scene of reality, all of these pieces of evidence point to one person, and that is God. And that's called abductive reasoning. And so from the known facts, all of them point powerfully and persuasively to God's existence. So we have answered the first question. Does God exist? Absolutely. And here's the type of God that we have discovered. We have discovered, as we combine all four arguments together, this is what we call a cumulative case for God's existence. We have discovered that God is transcendent, He is immaterial, He is unimaginably powerful, He is eternal, He is unchanging. He is the intelligent designer. He is the infinite omniscient mind and the source of objective morality. That's what we've discovered about God. Now, there are only 3 religions that can fit this bill. This is not the God of Hinduism. This is not the God of Buddhism. This is not the God of Zen or of the Mormons or of Spiritism or Shintoism. There are only 3 possibilities now that we need to examine. Now that we know that God exists, we only have to look at the 3 monotheistic faiths. This God that we have described His qualities must be either the God of Islam, the God of Judaism, or the God of Christianity. Those are the only 3 possibilities. Completely apart from the Bible, reason has shown us these different qualities. And there are only 3 possibilities, ladies and gentlemen. You can wipe all other competitors off the table. It must and can only be either the God of Christianity, the God of Islam, or the God of Judaism. And do you know which one it is? We'll find that out after lunch.